Good boy, Tucker.
Welcome, everybody.
Welcome.
Hey.
Welcome.
Work smarter where you want.
Consistency is key.
And remember, if it's not in Redtail, it never happened.
This is learning at its most fun.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today in another Thursday webinar. My name is Curtis Ware. I'm one of the trainers, and we also have Haley.
Hi, another one of the trainers with Redtail.
There we go. Today, again, just like last week, this is the second part of a series that Haley and I are doing called the Calendar Syncing Series, and this is part 2. So essentially what we wanted to do, and again, like I mentioned it, this was out of like Haley's brainchild of really just showing all the different options we can do to sync our Redtail calendar with outside sources. And really what we're going to be focused on today is more enhancing that. Once you can sync, how can you enhance on top of that? So again, we're just going to be reiterating a little bit of what we talked about last week and then showing you all the new possibilities of what you possibly can do. Possibilities of what you possibly can. I'm just saying the same word over and over again.
Define the same word with the same word.
Yes. Yeah. So with that, Haley, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I think what the metaphor, is that right? What that we used last time was ice cream or an ice cream sundae. And I really want to stress that because last week we really talked about your foundation or your base and whether it's vanilla or chocolate or strawberry or Neapolitan or whatever it is. Now we're talking about all of the toppings and where you can take, see, I'm going really far with this metaphor again. You can really take this calendar syncing tool and cater it to your preferences and your office needs as well. And I cannot tell you how many different ways I've seen calendar syncing used in the last 2 or 3 years since it became really popular in the industry. But the biggest, most important thing to note right now, here's the most important thing. You are the expert when it comes to your office and how your calendar syncing is set up for your team, because no two offices have this set up and utilize it the same way. No two offices have the same meeting structure or the same preferences. Some offices time block appointment times that are preset. Some offices have multiple locations that an advisor is going to. Some offices have virtual meetings. There is such a variety here. There really is a need for someone in your office to educate themselves and be the professional and the expert when it comes to your calendar syncing preferences and tools that your office uses. Did I say that well, Curtis? What do you think?
Yeah, and actually, like I love that point. Like, no two offices are the same. And actually, Haley, you and I were just talking about even in the same office, no two people are exactly the same either.
Right.
For instance, we have Haley and I are part of the training team. And our main job is to schedule trainings, do these webinars. Like, we do a lot of scheduling ourselves, and we actually have the freedom to sort of decide how we want to use that calendar. Like, we do have a structure and how we put things on, but the main thing is we all go back and use Redtail as our main calendar. But
Right.
that gives Haley the ability to choose to use Outlook and sync with Outlook and the calendaring systems through there, whereas I strictly just use like the app and Redtail itself. I don't use Outlook at all. So it's like, it gives us the freedom because we can always come back to Redtail as we know this is going to be consistent. And
Right.
that's what's great is we can still be individual, like each office is individual. So again, like it's you having Redtail as the main hub of everything gives you a lot of control for how you want to run your database.
That's because it's the compliant record, right? That's where you're going to go to run the report and see, well, how many reviews did this advisor have versus that advisor, or how many phone calls did this admin have, or even when was the last time I contacted this client? It's not all about the mass level reporting or the higher level reporting. Sometimes it's just to see when we last talked to them and what it was about. So yeah, but having that one place, that hub, where everyone comes together. So let's kind of recap from the last one just really quickly, because we know you were there and you saw our part 1 calendar syncing.
Oh, and if you did happen to miss part 1, we do have it recorded. It is recorded and posted already on the help desk. So I do want to point that out. Part 1 has been recorded. So if you did miss it, it's okay. We're going to do a brief recap and then before we move on to all those enhancements.
Absolutely, yeah. So we talked about 4 main calendar syncing options. However you want to count it, it's 3 or 4. Well, the first one is iCal. That is a one-way sync. The second one was Retriever for Tailwag. That's a desktop-based program, so your computer has to be on for that to be syncing. And then Retriever Cloud, which is the most versatile option and probably the most robust of the 3, but it's still not available to everyone depending on if your email is hosted by Office 365 or Google and how that Office 365 sync is set up through Microsoft. So in the last webinar, we kind of talked a little bit about how to figure out which one of those is right for you. And Retriever Cloud is the same tool. It just goes to either Office or Google. So let's go to our next slide here. And here's just kind of a visual on how they all work. The iCalendar is just one way. So we're not going to talk about that one today because we're talking about calendar scheduling programs or enhancements that you can make to your syncing. And one of the major benefits, or actually probably the foundational benefit of enhancements to your calendar syncing, is that it can go back into Redtail. So that just kind of scraps the iCal in today's conversation. So we're going to focus on Desktop Outlook and Retriever Cloud for Outlook 365 and Google. And you'll notice our arrows are different, and that's for a reason. With your Desktop Outlook, you're syncing between Redtail and Outlook, and then you can also choose to just send from Redtail to Outlook. So to utilize our calendar syncing options or other enhancements, you're going to want to use that top option where it's going back and forth. So if somebody schedules over in Outlook, it'll be able to get back into Redtail. I love this visual because it'll show you like that it'll go back and forth. But now let's actually see it in action, because I think that's where a lot of the power comes from. So I'm going to demo today Retriever Cloud through Outlook 365. And the reason I like this option is because, first of all, it's just like Google. There's no difference in what I'm going to be showing today in Retriever Cloud, Outlook 365, or Google. It will operate the same way whether you have an Outlook account or a Google account. I won't be showing the desktop Outlook option because I think that one's a little bit easier to understand because there is a tool that walks you through all of the preferences as you set it up. So that one, but it does operate in many of the same ways, and we'll talk about the differences as we go through them. So without further ado, let's go into our Redtail CRM. And where you start with Retriever Cloud is you go to your name in the top right-hand corner and then manage your integrations. Even though this is an integration, it is a tool that Redtail developed, so there is no cost to this integration. It's something that we developed to Outlook 365 or Google, totally free. So Retriever Cloud's under our integrations. A lot of these other integrations are other companies. That's why I mentioned that. To set it up, you're going to go to the little settings icon. And I know it's so tempting to click on settings first, but I really would encourage you to click on support first before setting up any integration and reading more about how that integration operates. Now,
actually, Haley, that's a great point. And actually, like I don't hear us push that enough, is that integration icon you can click and then go to the support page, and really we have screenshots. It shows you everything that you're going to be asked in regards to the setup and what it does straight to our help desk page. And it's a huge benefit to go here first, just like Haley is saying. So again, like go here, take a look at what it actually does. It explains more so than what we've been going over. And this is a great tool that completely underutilized.
Oh, I totally agree. And I'll let you in on a little secret too, everybody. Are you ready for a Redtail secret? When you call us to ask a question, we're looking at this. This is exactly the same. We don't have access to more information. I know you're laughing, Curtis. It's so true. I'm like, let me bring up my cheat sheet. It's not my cheat sheet, right? It's publicly available on every integration for everybody.
Yep. Absolutely true. Same, like Haley says, anytime we're looking something up, I know there's a lot of things we know off the top of our head, but honestly, for the little intricacies and the questions, we go to the help desk quite often. So we just want to let you know, we don't hide it from you. You have access to the same information.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm going to keep this open. I won't read it out loud to you guys. That would make for a very boring webinar. And we're not about that here. So we're going to actually demo it. So we will skip the support option and go straight to settings. And then it's going to bring up this modal here. Now, I've already set it up just because it happened so quickly. When you do set it up, and it would load very quickly anyway. But just to go through a couple of these options, you can choose to sync contacts or not. Totally doesn't relate at all to the calendar syncing. And we're not talking about the contact sync today, so we're going to focus on the other options. You can sync activities, and when you are setting it up, you'll have the option to select or unselect this, and then you actually get to choose what activity types sync from Redtail to Outlook.
Okay, so again, that's just the activity type. So remember, when you're adding an activity, you have activity type and activity category, which are used for reporting and finding the activities and just sorting those. But here with the high level of activity type, you can choose, I only want appointments to sync, or I only want appointments and meetings and phone calls. You can have everything sync, or you can limit it. It's up to you.
So personally, I'll give my best practice recommendations as we go through. Personally, I sync everything except for tasks. We get a lot of feedback on this integration that I don't want my tasks cluttering up my Outlook calendar because they all go to the top and they really stack up and clutter up the view. So sync every activity type except for those tasks, and then the tasks will remain in Redtail and will not sync over to Outlook. But then know when you're looking at your calendar on your phone, you may not see everything you're actually expected to do that day. So keep that in mind. And a sync completed. This one is going to be really important for today. When you sync completed, when you check this option, that means that when you complete a calendar activity in Redtail, it will be removed from your Outlook calendar. So just the other day, I ran into this conversation where I was looking back at my calendar in my phone, and I was like, I don't know what I did last Tuesday, and my last Tuesday was completely blank. And that was very alarming at first. But then I realized I had sync completed checked in my actual options. This is a test database. And that means that anytime I complete it in Redtail, it removes itself from my Outlook calendar or anywhere else I have that calendar set up. So keep that in mind, be aware of it. And then sync deletions into Redtail. So same idea here. If you have this selected, if you delete something in Outlook or your phone or wherever else you access that calendar, it will also be removed from Redtail. I do not recommend checking that option. I have it checked for demo purposes here, but I really don't think it's necessary. If you need to delete something, we have the Redtail app on your phone. You can go into Redtail and delete it from the Redtail app as a way around that, but that's just my personal recommendation.
Now, Haley, quick question. Like when, if you have something selected there and you want to change it, you do have to disable the sync first. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. So when I'm hovering over any of these options, I'm getting this big old no sign. You do have to disable the sync and then turn it back on. It doesn't affect anything else. When you set it back up, it usually sets everything else up just fine.
Okay, so yeah, keep in mind if you've already selected something and you can't uncheck something, all you do is disable it with that red button, and then you can change it and then re-enable.
Absolutely. So once you've got it set up and going, I'm going to cancel out of this. Let's look at my Redtail calendar. So we'll go over to calendar. I'm going to have it in week view just so we can see at a week's level what's going on. And then I'm going to pull up my Outlook calendar. So this is what Outlook online looks like. If you have a desktop Outlook, you could bring up your desktop Outlook as well. And it's going to show the same appointments here that I have on my Redtail calendar. And if I add an appointment to my Redtail calendar, it will sync to my Outlook calendar and vice versa. Now, we've already decided that if I add to Redtail and it's any activity type except for task, it will sync to Outlook. In Outlook, Outlook doesn't have activity type. So if we add something in Outlook, an activity, it's going to sync to Redtail as our default activity type. And your default activity type is under your name and preferences. So
And
there's
this is when you're saying if you add it to Outlook and it syncs to Redtail, because Outlook doesn't have the types and categories like Redtail does, it has to choose a specific one that it comes to here, is what you're saying, correct?
yeah. So for those of you who have used like workflows and automations, or if you're thinking about using workflows and automations in the future, there's only one workflow or one automation that you could trigger, and that would have to be based on your default activity type and your default activity category, if you wanted to be able to create those from Outlook. Now, I know for a lot of you who are watching this webinar, you're like, wait a minute, that was too much information too fast. That's okay. If you're not using automations or workflows, don't worry about it at this stage. It's something that you would circle back to when setting up workflows and automations. All right, so we've got our calendar in Outlook, we've got our calendar in Redtail. Now here's where it gets really interesting. I'm gonna demo Calendly today. Calendly is an appointment scheduling program, and we don't have any relationship with Calendly. They're not like Redtail's official partner or anything. We don't have an official partner with any calendar scheduling program. This is just one that I found is easy to use and works well with the sync. But other ones include Schedule Once, Acuity, Time Trade, Microsoft Bookings.
There's a lot of different syncing tools, and one thing to keep in mind is Redtail again doesn't sync directly with any of these calendar syncing apps, so that's what we're just showing you the bridge. The bridge between Redtail and Outlook, and then how to use these scheduling tools, because that's a big part of your calendar syncing is how can I use a scheduling tool outside of this. And that's really what we want to push here. So again, there's a list, like you said, Calendly, Schedule Once, Microsoft Bookings.
Acuity. Acuity and Calendly. Calendly is my personal favorite, but as with everything Redtail ever recommends, check with your broker dealer or whoever your compliance team is first on what you're allowed to use or what's been approved for you in your office. I know some broker dealers have approved Schedule Once. I'm not as familiar with the Schedule Once program, but it really does most of the same things as Calendly. They really are the same tool, just with different preferences. The one different one, the one caveat is Microsoft Bookings, and I believe that's included in one of Microsoft's like suites of products, and that one can only be used with Retriever for Tailwag. So that's the desktop sync tool. If you want to use Microsoft Bookings, you're not able to use Retriever Cloud. And the reason for that is that Retriever Cloud creates an additional calendar over here on the left-hand side of your Outlook or your email account. And Microsoft Bookings has a requirement that it has to be on the default calendar to work. So those two just butt heads, they don't work. But with Retriever Cloud, you can use Acuity, Schedule Once, Calendly, and Time Trade. That's the other one. So we're good to go. We're using Calendly. So here's Calendly. I like it because it's simple. I mean, if I could figure it out, so can you. So here's our Calendly. The biggest setting to look for in whatever calendar scheduling tool you have is where the account has a calendar connection. So most of these calendar syncing tools don't have a calendar within the program themselves. They require you to connect to an internet calendar. Yahoo, Google, Outlook, your email account calendar, whatever it is. So we're going to go to Calendar Connections. And then under here, we're going to select a calendar to link to. So you're going to get a lot of these same options in any calendar scheduling program. We're going to choose Office 365 Calendar because that's what I have in my other tab here. So it's outlook.com. I just created a free Outlook email address. I think it's like Trainer Haley at outlook.com. I just went to Outlook's or Microsoft's website and created an email address there. And then click Connect. And it's going to go ahead and ask me which one I should log into. So I'm going to log into my trainer email address. And now it's connected. It's just that easy. They're connected. So one thing to look out for, though, is now that I've linked my Calendly and my Outlook, just like most calendar scheduling programs, it linked to my default calendar. So we want to configure and look for additional preferences. So we're going to edit, and we want to check these places for conflicts. We want to check the Redtail calendar on Outlook, not the default, because I don't use my default. I'm going to use the one that came from Redtail because that's the one that goes back and forth with Redtail. And then update. And then it's asking when you add an event, so somebody comes on to my Calendly and they add a calendar event, which calendar should we add it to? Well, same thing. We should add it to the Redtail calendar, not the default. Otherwise, I'm going to have Calendly sending to my default calendar, and my Redtail calendar will never get any appointments to send over to the Redtail CRM. And then always keep an eye out for additional preferences in your syncing program, like this one. This one is asking, should we sync cancellations? When you delete or decline an event in your calendar, we'll also cancel it in Calendly. So say somebody invites me to a calendar event in Outlook. If I decline it, should that cancel my Calendly event? Sometimes it helps to think through what it's asking. I just prefer to test it. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it selected and update it.
Haley, question for you. Because we had a similar question come up about how the deletions in Redtail can affect like the syncing with these syncing tools. Is that specific setting what's referring? Like if you delete something in Redtail and it removes from Outlook, it can also control it on Calendly. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So I recommend setting a rule for yourselves and your offices. We are only going to delete in this way. And that way could be deleting from Redtail. Really what I'd recommend is that rule would be handling it in the calendar scheduling program, like declining it or rescheduling it or encouraging the client to reschedule it instead of canceling it outright. And then going into Redtail, marking it completed or opening, marking it completed that way. Or some of these connections can even move it. So if somebody reschedules it in Calendly, it will just move it on your Redtail calendar as well. So before you roll this out to clients, test it, test it, test it. Can't stress that enough. All right, so now that we've got it all set up, let's go to our home. There are so many other preferences in Calendly when it comes to setting up like a buffer between appointments, and this is not a Calendly webinar, so I'm not going to go through all of those options, but keep in mind when you start using a calendar scheduling tool that it has that much versatility when it comes to what shows as available. You're learning a new tool and applying it to your office, so this isn't something I would go set up today and then send to all of your clients tomorrow. It's going to take some time, a slow rollout, and communicate with your clients. Let them know, we're all in a time of change right now where, everything changes sometimes daily. So let them know, hey, we're trying a new calendar scheduling process. Here's this new link. Let us know your thoughts on the availability.
So on top of that, what we're talking at this point again is all the different variations of how you can set it up. In this particular case, if you're using a program like Calendly, you can have a link that you send to your client. So that way you're not going back and forth with email saying, hey, what about this date? Well, what about this date? Back and forth over and over. You can just send a link. They see the calendar and what you have available and they can schedule something. That's going to then automatically through Calendly sync it to Outlook if you're connecting those two together. And then with Redtail and Outlook, however you sync those, it's going to add that activity into Redtail. So all from sending out a link to your client, an activity can go through multiple bridges and add itself to Redtail. So that way you see it on the calendar. One thing with that I do want to point out is, again, what we talked about in the session last week, was it because Outlook is not a CRM, it does not connect a contact record with an activity when it's going from Outlook to Redtail. Okay, so in that same sense, the contact record is not going to be connected in Redtail. You will still have to go in after the fact and then attach the contact record so you can use the system properly. But again, it talks about like what is the benefits to you? Well, the benefit might outweigh, the having to go back in to link it. So the benefit of scheduling things really easily might be worth it for you. And again, I've talked to people where it's not worth having to go back in and connect the contacts. It's just easier to give them a call and schedule it that way. And that's why we talked about at the beginning, every person, every office runs things differently. So again, just keep in mind, everything we're suggesting today doesn't mean do everything we're saying. It says what works best for you.
Absolutely. I great points. And one thing I want to expand on is this might not be right for your clients. This might be right for your prospect calls or your prospect meetings. And for your clients, you still have that personal touch of calling and scheduling a meeting with them. But if you find that a lot of office time is being wrapped up in scheduling prospect appointments or prospect calls or managing cancellations that really aren't making any money for the business, consider rolling out an easy scheduling system. And what I like too is that it kind of shows the commitment up front for me. This is a virtual progress meeting. It's going to be 45 minutes. So me as the client or the prospect or the whoever, I know what to expect going in, and I'm more respectful of your time. And I know that only a small portion of the day has been allocated to me this way. One other really, innovative, I was going to say crazy, but it's really innovative. One innovative way to use this is I've seen some offices set up this calendar scheduling program and not once ever send it to clients. And that sounds like a trick, right? Or a trick question. But it can also help take a lot of the burden off your staff when they're looking at the Redtail calendar and they're trying to calculate, okay, we have 5 client reviews total this week. There's only 2 on Thursday. I know some offices just said, did she say only 2? 2 is a lot for one day. Sorry. There's 2 on Thursday. There's 3 on Wednesday, but there's only 1 on Monday. So I can schedule another one on Monday. I've heard from offices so often, we accidentally overbooked this week, so we had a crazy week. Or this week was very light. We only had 2 client reviews this week, and we were trying to figure out why when the week before had 7. This is a great way to streamline how many are allowed in a week. Once a week is unavailable, then your staff has to move to the next week for calendar scheduling, and you as the advisor can really control more of what your admins are able to book on your calendars without setting huge activities for time blocks within Redtail.
Now, Haley, like you've done this internally because you've used a similar program when you're scheduling your trainings, and that's one thing. Haley and I schedule our trainings completely differently, but they end up on our Redtail calendar the exact same way. So again, like I normally will reach out or just email someone like, hey, like this time, things like that. It's almost kind of talking back against, hey, here's a new tool. Haley uses more technology. She leans into the technology. She lets it use her. Whereas like I'm and I don't want to really use this word, but slightly more old school in the fact of like scheduling them. Like I want to reach out, I want to talk to them. And also Haley has the benefit of going back and forth. So like instead of sending the link, sometimes she might call, but she can still send that. And then she will still use, like, from what I understand, you'll still use Calendly to schedule it. So that way you don't overbook yourself.
Yes.
And let's say, for instance, that if I end the day at 5 o'clock and I have a meeting that ends at 4, but then somebody booked something at 4 o'clock, now all of a sudden, like the follow-up for the other meeting, I'm technically overbooked, even though I have something that ends at 5 when I'm done. But using a calendar syncing tool can eliminate that issue, where it's not going to schedule anything if you only have an hour left in the day, because it needs to give you that time to do all of your follow-up work. And Calendly has those abilities, and I love that about it. And it's not just Calendly. We use we're saying Calendly because that's the program that some of us specifically use. But a lot of these other programs do the same thing. You get to control what's actually going on your calendar. so you're not going to overbook yourself.
Right. Yeah. I know for me, I'm not able to give my clients the attention they deserve when I have more than 4 trainings in a day or more than 3 trainings in a day. And a training is a committed hour. So if I have 4, that's 4 hours of my 8-hour day that I'm just giving time to a dedicated client. That only leaves me 4 hours for additional projects or other work that needs to be done. And like Curtis said, setting follow-ups. So really determine where you're at your best and how you're able to serve your clients at your best. Or if you're an admin on this call, think about how you can empower your advisor to be at their best for their clients. And it might just be a minor shift to using a calendar scheduling program like this internally, not even for clients. And Curtis is right. If I'm on the phone with somebody and they're asking what my availability is, I go to this screen just like I would send this link to any of you on this webinar. And I would give you my availability, and I'm giving myself this availability too. I always can override it because I'm the boss when it comes to my calendar, and I can go back to Redtail and book, that way if needed, or if somebody wanted an after 5 o'clock, sometimes I'm willing, right? But this really does help you measure and like Curtis said, just know when you can be at your best. Because what you don't want to do is what I was doing before, and I'm a serial overbooker. So Curtis knows I would overbook, and then I would take a week vacation because I needed a cool off period.
You really would a little bit. Now, Haley, on top of that, like with the calendar syncing and scheduling system, there's another integration that we have that is sort of not talking about Retriever or syncing with Outlook at all.
Right.
I would love to talk about as well. So we're going to step back out of the bridges. So again, we originally were talking about syncing Redtail to Outlook and then syncing to a calendar scheduling system. Now, let's sort of shift gears and talk about another integration that is directly with Outlook called Zapier.
Right.
Now, am I moving too fast, or is that was the next one, correct?
No, this is good. Yeah.
Perfect. So Zapier, again, now this is still another program. Redtail has not created Zapier, but what's great about this program is it's an automation program that works with companies. So for instance, it's not just saying activities with Redtail to Outlook. It's saying it's syncing things that happen in Redtail that go elsewhere in any other program. Now, we use Zapier more than just for calendar items. What it does is anytime I do an action, so if you're familiar with automations in Redtail, which is strictly in the system, you can say anytime I add an activity, it starts a workflow. Anytime I update a status, it sends an email. Like those are automations in Redtail, but Zapier are automations that when I do something in Redtail, it can affect something in another program, which is phenomenal. Like that's still leaning into technology. So as an example, more and more people are getting so familiar with Zoom. Using Zoom and scheduling meetings. Personally, I use Zapier to bridge the gap between Zoom and Redtail. So what happens is anytime I create an actual meeting inside the Zoom program, Zapier bridges the gap and automatically adds that to my calendar in Redtail. Okay, so again, I can actually add something in Zoom, and this program can add it to my Redtail calendar. Amazing. I love that it does that. Also, again, outside of the system, I also do a lot of editing. So again, Zapier is more than just for calendar. When I do editing, I actually upload to the program Dropbox, and then that automatically notifies our marketing team that a video has been uploaded. So there's all these different things that Zapier can be the go-between for to help you with your business. Now, I do want to point out this is not a webinar to promote Zapier. It's just something that the trainers have found extremely useful, and we want to make sure that you know your options. There is a free version of Zapier, which is actually very useful. I use the free version. I think, Haley, you used to do quite a bit more with Zapier.
I do. I call it the only bill I happily pay because it does that much for me. Yeah, so I do have the paid version, but that's because I utilize premium apps, which come at a cost, none of which I think relate to an advisor's day-to-day, so not worth mentioning here. But all of the ones that you mentioned so far, Dropbox.
All free. All
Those
free.
are all free. And Redtail's free, and Zoom is free, and the Google Calendar, the Outlook Calendar, those are all free.
Now, keep in mind, when we say free, we're saying the use of using Zapier with these programs. Those programs themselves, most of the time, are not free. So keep in mind, the use of creating what they call a zap between the programs is free. And honestly, like, you can set up 5 different zaps, and that's 5 different triggers of events that can happen on any of your programs. And that's what you can do with that. I only have 2 set up, and it's those 2 that I've already mentioned. And this is a great item to, and again, anytime you do something, maybe even you want to, anytime you schedule a meeting, if you have another program, it adds that meeting to Calendly. I believe it does sync with Calendly too, doesn't it, Haley?
So I want to not use the word sync though, right? It does.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, it does work with Calendly. So we moved from calendar syncing. So for those of you that were listening during the calendar syncing section, and it was letting go of too much control, because I know that's hard, right? And for me, I'm very obsessive compulsive. I have OCD, right? So when we're talking about syncing, I'm like, wait, I have to trust that it's syncing. Trust doesn't come easy to me. Not going to happen, right? Or I'm giving too much responsibility, or I'm empowering too much. So Zapier is where you can still hold on to some of that control, because you're giving it very specific instructions. You're saying, when I create a calendar activity in my Redtail that has a type of personal or out of office, then create a calendar activity on my personal calendar so my husband or family know that I'm going to be at home that day, because it's an out of the office from the office. I actually have that. That's one of my zaps, is when I request time off with Redtail, or I decide I'm going to take a personal day or whatever, I put it on my Redtail calendar so Curtis knows, don't call me on that day. And then it creates another activity on my Google Calendar so my husband knows I'm going to be home that day. But the important thing to note there is that it's an action. When I create this activity is created. But when I edit this activity has no idea that this one's been edited, because they are completely separate. It is not syncing.
So that's a really great point. So the first stuff we talked about was syncing through Office 365 or Outlook. Those things when you edit, can actually affect the other and move together. So right. This is, you have to decide what's best for you. If you just want to create things, okay, I do it now, it creates it over here, then Zapier actually might be a great tool for you. But if you do a lot of edits and changing things like that, you're losing a little control and a little of the automation itself. So keep in mind, this isn't always the best idea for all people, but for some people might find it extremely useful for creating things. And again, Zoom is now a big one. And the time of living in a pandemic where we're at home a lot and doing more virtual meetings, every time I create something on Zoom, I love it to add it to my Outlook. But again, if I have to change something, I have to go and change it. Sorry, it adds it to my Redtail, not my Outlook. If I have to change that meeting, I do have to go to my Redtail activity and the Zoom activity and edit both of them together, because they don't connect anymore.
Right. So why would we use Zapier over a calendar syncing program? Well, I'm glad you asked. One of the main benefits is that with Zapier, it's integrating with Redtail in a different way, which allows it to pull in the linked contact. Whoa, slow down, Haley, back up, right? So what that means is, if you set up a zap in Zapier that says, when I create, or when somebody schedules on Schedule 1, Security, Time Trade, Calendly, whatever, when somebody schedules on my calendar scheduling program, then I want it to create a Redtail activity. You can tell that Redtail activity what activity type to have, and you can pull in the email address for the person that scheduled that activity. So my client, Curtis, schedules the activity. He puts his email address in Calendly or whatever, or the calendar scheduling program, it requires it. That way it goes to Redtail. Redtail will search all of your contacts in Redtail for somebody that has that email address. Because I have clean data in my CRM, because I watch other Redtail tutorials, it's going to pull in Curtis's contact record and link his contact to that activity in Redtail. And it can even fire off an automation, which could link a workflow based on that type.
Awesome. So again, what you're saying is this is using Zapier as the bridge between Schedule Once or Calendly and Redtail.
Yes.
So if they schedule something, it's not going through your Outlook, but it is going directly to Redtail. And because they put their email address in, it links the contact record with a matching email address.
Yep.
So remember earlier when we said, if you're using Office 365 and it sends it to Office 365, then to Redtail, you have to go in after the fact and link the contact record. This direction actually links the contact record for you automatically. So again, this is one of those times, what is more beneficial? Is it worth my time to make sure I link the contacts manually, or is it worth more my time to, if I make a change in an activity, that I also need to change it over here? So again, you can see each integration is slightly different. You need to think of those possibilities and options of what's going to be a benefit or something you need to be concerned about.
I'm really gonna nerd out here too. I do that all the time, right? Is you can also use both. I have Zapier and Calendly, Zapier and Zoom, and I have Calendly and Outlook 365 and Redtail. I did not set it up in one day. This has been a process for over 2 years, right, Curtis? Where I'm trying out things. I'm telling clients, hey, I'm trying something new. Will you be my guinea pig over here? How was that experience for you? And I've been very slow about it because I'm playing around with it. But when you're doing this for your business, just make sure that everyone knows you're testing it out. And you really, I can't stress this enough, have 1 or 2 key people in your office who set everything up, record how they set it up in a way, and in a document that's accessible to everybody. Because there are different preferences in each of these different tools. And when a password changes, or when a preference changes, or when something happens, you're going to want to be able to reference internal documentation for your own office on your specific setup. It's kind of like creating a recipe for your own version of an ice cream sundae.
Thanks so much for joining us today for this particular session. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give us a call at 800-206-5030, option 3 for support, or just shoot us an email over to support@redtailtechnology.com. Thanks a lot and have a great day.